الحمد لله بعد الصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. اللهم علمنا ينفعنا والفائدة من أن تنزلنا علما إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وصلى الله على سيدنا Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. So yes, we're on page 31. We're looking at the chapter that's called the consequences of this danger, right? I.e. the danger of inward sin. Because again, just to recap, what we're getting at in this book is Imam al-Buti is asking the question about why is it that despite so much Islamic activity nowadays, we see so much, quote unquote, dawah work, we see courses and conferences and deen intensives, we see all this activity going on, but Muslims have not rescaled or reascended that peak of civilization that they had in the past, like the peak of the Ottoman times or the Abbasid times. Why are Muslims still where they are? So what the Imam al-Bulti is addressing is he's saying that this has to do with an inward thing. He says that yes, people are doing all this activity. That can't be denied. But what are the intentions behind it? Are people really doing it for Allah? Are people really doing it to purify themselves? Are people really doing it for the sake of establishing Islam? Or are there personal agendas at play? Are people doing it because they want to be famous, or because they want to seek wealth, or because they have some sort of an ego? They're driven by their ego to be in some type of position. So so he says that people, what happens is people get involved in this. People can get involved in this quote unquote dawah work or Islamic activism, and they start to miss the fundamentals. So they start to sort of, it's like we say in English, you kind of you miss the forest for the trees, right? You're looking at the trees, but you don't actually see the wider forest around you. And so on page 30, he makes this point. This is what I should lead into just to recap. So he says it's an astonishing, distressing delusion. It's caused what I said, ignoring the huge fundamental difference between Islam and the other ideological movements, right? So here's, we have to make this clear. Uh, so these harakat al-fiqriya, you might call them, right? Now, this word ideology is very, very interesting, because the word ideology, when it was first translated into Arabic from one of the early Ottoman dictionaries, which one of my teachers has, it was just translated as fikr muhdath, right? Like it's just an invented idea. It's not based on revelation. So people have to be careful about comparing Islam to an ideology, or even worse, calling Islam an ideology, because ideologies are human things. They're human ideas. They're based in human thought. They're not revelation. Islam is revelation. You can't compare the two, right? It's worse than apples and oranges, as we say in English. It's worse, right? It's revelation and then human ideas. The other thing that gets caught about this is when people treat Islam like it's just like any other ideological movement, is they use the same tools and means that ideological movements use, right? So for example, if you take an organization like a political party, or what they call an NGO, like a non-governmental organization, right? What do they resort to? They resort. What are their means of getting the message out? Well, they do demonstrations, they do protest marches, they do street rallies, they hand out flyers and stuff like that. But then you look at and they protest governments. Especially what they do. They go to governments. They go to houses of parliament. They go outside the prime minister's residence, wherever it is, and they protest and they say, "Give us this, give us this, give us this." Right? But then you have Muslim organizations that they do the exact same thing. They use the exact same means, right? They hand out flyers, they organize marches, protests, demonstrations, and so forth. And then they'll do funny stuff, like they'll go outside the Houses of Parliament in London, or 10 Downing Street, or the House of Congress, and say, "Give us back the Khilafah." Like, well, give us back the Ottoman Empire. That's not going to work. That's not going to work. But see, but that's their method. That's their method. See, what people seem to misunderstand is that's their method. That's what they do, right? When they have problems, when they have problems and issues, they turn to their politicians and their rulers and the people that they see or they think are in charge and are able to run things. That's not what we do. We turn to Allah. We turn to Allah for our problems, because Allah says in Surah Al-Ra'd, the 13th chapter, verse 11, Allah says, "Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim." Allah doesn't change a people until they change it themselves. If you really want to see change, you have to start with yourself. So if people say, okay, well, we want to have a khilafah, and we want to have a ruler like Omar ibn Abdul Aziz. And he says, okay, are you going to be like the people that lived under Omar Abdul Aziz, anhu? There's a video, the Sheikh, I'm sure you met him before, Ustaz Jalaluddin, Sheikh Rashid Salim al-Qalam, mashallah. Like I have a video on my channel where he talks about like unreasonable du'as, and he says I once heard a man make a du'a. He says, "Oh Allah, give me a wife like Sayyidina Fatima radiallahu anha. Give me a wife like Fatima." And he said, "Okay, well, and when are you going to be Ali ibn Abi Talib?" Right? We have to be reasonable in these things, right? So, but the point is, we don't use their methods because again, their methods are rooted in secularism, they're rooted in materialism, and they're rooted in the immediate, right? These people think, like, you look at political parties or environmental organizations, Greenpeace, the rest. They honestly believe that ultimate power lies with these politicians, right? With the prime minister or the president, whoever it is, right? Whereas we know that ultimate power and authority lies with Allah, and Allah will change our state if we change what's in ourselves, because that's what Allah's told us. So now, to lead on to that, so if people fall into that frame of mind, and they think, no, 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 we just have to go out and protest, we have to demonstrate, we have to be active, right? What this leads to is and this is why it says on page 31, these other consequences, is that these people who fall into that activist mindset, they then look down on people who do dhikr, or they look down on people who put a lot of effort into bettering themselves and spending time with Allah and drawing near to Allah, who spend time in extra worship, doing afkar, doing du'as, praying tahajjud, praying salat al-duha, praying salat al-hajjah, fasting Mondays and Thursdays. They look down on these kinds of people, right? And they think, he says they look down on people who take upon themselves to watch their hearts and strive via various legitimate ways to rectify their souls. So they think that these people busy themselves with something that's of no benefit. Like, they're just wasting their time. Like, we have to be active. We have to get out there. Why are they wasting so much time in the Zawiya? Why are they wasting so much time doing dhikr? Why are they wasting so much time doing med for the Messenger of Allah? Why are they doing all this kind of stuff? And then they even go further and they call it, like, they'll even say this stuff's bid'ah. What's all this dhikr? What's all this stuff? And the balance here is listen, yes, obviously we're not monks, right? We don't lock ourselves in our rooms and just do ibadah and completely disengage ourselves from the world. That's another extreme. We don't do that. We don't ignore what's happening in the world, ignore our communities, ignore our families, right? There's a hadith uh, in which the Messenger of Allah saw something like some companions told them about how some of them were fasting a lot, some of them were not eating a lot, some of them were praying so much, and he had to explain to them. He said, and then this hadith is one where he says, "Man raghiba an sunnati falaysa minni," whoever turns away from my sunnah is not from me, because he said, I fast and I break my fast, I pray at night and I sleep as well, and I marry women, right? You don't just cut yourself off to that extreme. So there has to be a balance, and that's what he says. Yes, it is blameworthy when someone confines himself to these devotions and thinks nothing of the necessity to do amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar, right? And to fix what has become corrupt, right? Because when someone does that, he avoids, he ignores, he fails to fulfill so many of Allah's obligations. But at the same time, there's no good in a person's Islam if that Islam does not refine his soul and also rectify his heart and rid it of this worldly life. Like, you have to have that balance. And you have to realize that whatever success that you're hoping for in the field of da'wah, in the field of activism, in the field of teaching, translating, like what we're doing, publishing books, like, all of that lies in your relationship with Allah. That's where it all comes down to that. You have to be turning to Allah and asking Allah for tawfiq and all these things, and realizing that whatever success comes your way, that's all from Allah. And the mistakes are yours, the failures are yours, and you have to ask Allah to help you to rectify those things. So he says, for a person, for every Muslim, his obligation is to be a Muslim in the fullest sense. Not just the activist Muslim, not just the quote-unquote Sufi Muslim or whatever, the fullest sense, put it all together, fulfilling all of Allah's rights, starting with the struggle against his soul, right? You start the struggle against your soul, and then you move on to rectifying your family and your relatives, right? Because that's why Allah says, "Qu anfusakum wa ahlikum nara," right? And so Tahrim, the 66th chapter, verse 6, save yourselves and your families. You start with yourself. And again, this is a constant theme. This is just a truth. This is just a truth we have to understand is that you have to prioritize your enemies. We all have enemies. You have to prioritize your enemies. The first enemies you have to conquer are the internal ones. If you don't conquer the internal enemies, you'll have no hope against the external enemies. And the internal enemies have to be conquered first. Um, and this works all the way up from yourself and your immediate struggles all the way through to jihad and statecraft, all these things. It all comes into that. So for example, like Imam al-Buti in his book on jihad talks about like he explains what happened when Salahuddin al-Ayyubi radiallahu anhu, when he fought the Crusaders, and Nuruddin Zengi radiallahu anhu, when they fought the Crusaders, like what were they actually doing? Did they just fight? Like no, because people don't think about the fact that there's a huge gap between the Crusaders arriving in Jerusalem in 1099 in the Gregorian calendar, and then the Muslims taking back Jerusalem in 1187 after the Battle of Hattin. But there's an 88-year gap there. It's like, well, what's going on there? So in that time, people like Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, Nuruddin Zengi, other people, what they're doing is they're cleaning up the internal enemies because we had internal enemies that were causing problems. Because like it's like the Crusaders, that's like the last on the list. It's like we've got problems. We've got the Hashishin cult running around Sham. We've got the Fatimids, the Shiites running Egypt, right? And we've got other issues. So the first thing they do is they remove those. Right? This is why Azhar, the Universal Azhar, that's why, and the Masjid, that's why it's a Sunni institution because Salah al-Ayyubi went there and took over. So Egypt was reestablished upon Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Syria was cleaned up and established upon Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Then Salahuddin al-Ayyubi and Nuruddin Zengi, they built madrasas everywhere. They built madrasas all over Sham and Egypt. And then out of those madrasas, that's where the army came from. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi raised his army from these people. These are all Tulab al-Ilm. So, and why do I stress it? Because these are Tulab al-Ilm. These are people who knew Allah, they knew the Quran, they memorized the Quran, they knew fiqh, they knew tafsir, they knew hadith, they knew all these things. They fasted regularly, prayed tahajjud. So he raised an army of people who had already conquered their inner enemies, right? People were on the ball. They were not losing the internal battles. He brought in people who were winning the internal battle. They were winning the internal battle, and because they were winning the internal battle, the internal battle, they thus won the outward battle, and they defeated the Crusaders, and they brought Jerusalem back under Muslim control. So this is what the Imam is essentially getting at. So then another thing is the another consequence of this danger is the false tribalism that can take root. Okay, and this is something I remember I wrote about a long time on my blog. I called it. There's a blog post called "The Law is the First and the Last." That's what it reminds me of because he says that people start having loyalty towards a group, right? He says it could be a group, a family, a tribe, a sheikh, or a congregation, and then what happens is people start confusing the means with the end. Right. So this how it works. So for example, we have lots of jama'at amongst the Muslim communities, right? We have lots of jama'at. We have obviously the four madhabs. We have lots of turuq. We have lots of political movements. We have all these things under the umbrella of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, right? But think about this, right? A tariqah, like a Sufi tariqah. What is it? Why is it called a tariqah? Tariqah is a meaning of like tariq. It's a road. A road leads somewhere. A madhab. Think of the word madhab. It's ism makan min al-fi'l dhahaba, to go. It's a place where you go. Again, it has that meaning of like a path or a trajectory. What are these paths and trajectories leading to? They're leading to Allah. That's what they're leading to, right? All these roads lead to Allah. So what that means is the madhab you follow, the tariqah you follow, whatever jama'at is, all of it is a means towards Allah. It's a means towards Allah, right? If you start saying that the means are the end, if you turn the means into the end, and you say no, everyone has to be upon this, then everything goes downhill, right? So, for example, now I'm guessing if I have a lot of people here talking from Singapore, Malaysia, if Jalaluddin, Ustadh Jalaluddin I came here and said no, everyone must be upon the Shafi madhab, everyone, right? The success of the Ummah depends on it. Everyone. Let's not get anywhere because now we turn the Shafi madhab from a means into an end, right? Or you say everyone must follow this tariqah, everyone must follow this jama'ah, everyone must follow this thing. That destroys everything because you've turned a mean when it's supposed to be into an end in of itself, and that will never be successful. And then also all the arrogance that leads to as well. And then he says, and then something else comes about this, right? Where he says uh, that people get so enamored with the group or the jama'ah that they're involved in, uh, that they actually start to invest their faith in. This is where he starts talking in the next few pages. So put it this way. Put it this way. Okay. Basic principle. We judge the living by the dead. We judge the living by the dead. Okay. So what that means is the ulama who are dead, the ulama who have passed away, right? And we know everything about them. And now Imam al-Buti, rahimahullah, has joined those ranks because he left us 10 years ago. But you think back to the past. You think back to great people like Imam al-Nawawi, like Imam al-Suyuti, like Imam Muhammad al-Ghazali, like Imam Afnim Qudama, like Qadi Iyad, all these big, massive figures throughout history, right? We know everything about these people, right? We're not going to discover something dodgy or fishy about them all these years later. We know who they are, okay? So what that means is when you want to use the expression, to invest your faith, you want to put your faith somewhere safe. You put it in those people. When you invest your Islam into those people, your Islam is safe. It's like investing in gold. It's safe. It's safe, right? When it comes to people who are alive, when it comes to people who are alive, right? Organizations or certain individuals who are alive right now in this day and age, there can be good in them, right? But you don't want to invest your faith 100% in them. You don't want to say, yes, this is Islam. This is what Islam is. I'm going to put all my Islam to these people because the thing is, as long as they're alive, something can go wrong. I'm not saying it will. I'm not saying it must, but it can. That possibility is there. And that's what happens with a lot of people. Again, you guys are in Singapore, Malaysia, love you. I've seen this stuff happen out in the West, out in UK, North America, where people get so involved in like a living person. This is why I stressed in my book, The Big Step, the importance of learning Arabic and connecting with the ulama of the past, especially. But it's like people get so involved in like one person or more of an organization, they think that's it. This is all Islam is. And when that organization, for whatever reason, fails or it goes out of existence, they leave Islam. They literally apostate, or they just go off the rails and don't really care anymore because you invested your Islam in something that wasn't permanent, right? So, like investing in current organizations, you have to be careful because it's like paper currencies, right? Some are good, some are bad, some fall by the wayside, but none of them are permanent. None of them are permanent. You have to be careful. So, don't uh, don't allow yourself to get so stuck into like a living organization, right? Or living thing. Like you want to have that connection to the ulama of the past. And that's why again this importance of the Arabic language that you can actually access books by people like Imam Nawawi or Imam Suyuti or Imam Muhammad Ghazali. And or especially whatever method you are, the books of that method, you want to be able to check stuff. So, and then he quotes here, for example, there's a quote by Badiou Zaman Sayyid. Notice who says, beware of attaching the truth I'm calling you towards, beware of attaching the truth that I'm calling you towards to my sinning transitory person. Rather, you must immediately attach it to its most sanctified source, Allah's book and the sunnah of his Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Right? So don't look at me and think like I'm the definition of truth. Right? Like, oh, because I do this. No, no, no. The truth is in the book of Allah and the Sunnah of Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. I'm just a conduit. I'm just conveying this to you. Don't invest it all in me. So, and he says this dangerous tribalism goes back to the nature of egoism within a person, which is one of the most dangerous diseases of the heart that Muslims treat and persistently struggle against in order to rid himself of it. So we have to get away from this. Because this is what shaitan comes in. The ego thinks the ego comes in and people think, yeah, everyone has to be with me, or everyone has to follow me, or everyone has to follow my jama'ah, and it becomes a selfish thing. It's an ego. It's an all egotistical thing, and the actual objective of working towards Allah and drawing near to Allah and working for Allah, that gets lost. That just gets lost. Um, um, so he gives some examples. He says here, you will see one of them become extremely angry because presumably the sanctity and nobility of the religion was violated. But if you look at the soul, you'll see that he only flew into a rage because the sanctity and nobility of his own person was disturbed. Now, what's happening here, and this also is in the book we're currently working on, Ustadh Clinical Paper 6. Imam Ramadan talks about this as well. Nasr al-Manhaj al-Rabbani, how you get people who, so for example, someone might be dressed religiously, right? He might be wearing like a jubba, an amama, and then someone sins in his presence, right? While he's walking outside, someone sins in his presence, and he sees, oh, he's doing that to he's doing that because he's doing that to inflame, he's doing that to spite, and then he goes and he attacks that person, right, and berates him and says, right, and he tells himself, and he tells other people that he's doing this for the sake of the deen, but really it's an ego thing. It's an ego thing. He's actually defending his ego. Like, you dare to do this in my presence? Don't you know who I am? Right? It's that kind of thing. Um, then he says, there's also the person who's affiliated to a sheikh or congregation. He never ceases to be a zealot for that individual or that organization. His egoism leads him to have such zealotry that he thinks that sincere Muslims are only those who are affiliated to his sheikh or his congregation. All of the Muslims are second class. If a Muslim is not with his sheikh or congregation, he must be against them. Okay, so this is what we discussed before. This is where the means, the tariqah or the madhab, it becomes an end. So it's like, you have to follow me. They're not following me. There's something wrong with you, and it's never going to work, and Islam will never be ascended again because you're not following my sheikh and my jama'ah, right? This is, again, you're seeing your tariqah or your jama'ah, whatever it is, your method, as the end in and of itself and not the means. So this is why he says the Muslim must realize that his sheikh that he's learning from, the spiritual guide that he has under him, like his murshid or the congregation, the jama'ah that he's with, is a means and not an end. So that's what he says. And therefore, the means are only important to the extent that they are in harmony with and agree with the end, which is the foundation. And he goes on to say, thus, his love for his sheikh does not distract him from what Allah has obligated upon him, nor does his following the congregation or brethren drive him away from being loyal to all other sincere Muslims. Right? This is, again, there's nothing wrong with being part of a jama'ah or there's nothing wrong with it, but don't let it make you arrogant, and then you look down on Muslims who aren't part of your organization. Uh, this is because his connection to his sheikh or congregation is merely a branch of his essential, firmer connection to Allah's book and the sunnah of his messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the principles and rulings that they lay down. Right. So this is the idea. We don't want to. You don't want your jama'ah to be part of something that actually divides people. Right. You don't want that to happen. Your jama'ah should be something that unites people, right? And you don't have you don't have. So obviously, we're talking about like Ahlul Bidah, but we're talking about like other organizations that you can work with. We work with them, right? So we're thinking here, it's like Nawabooks is not meant to be like the only publisher on the face of the earth, right? You take that as an example, right? That's not the idea that no, people should only buy Nawabooks and Nawabooks publications are the best ones. And no, there are other good books out there. There are other translators out there. There are other books out there. Work with these things, use these things, right? Because we're all working towards the same thing. We're trying to spread knowledge. We're trying to spread Islam. We're trying to get people closer to Allah. That's what we're working towards, right? It's not. So like this organization, it's a means amongst any other means. It's one path amongst other paths that all lead, and they're supposed to lead uh, back to Allah. And what happens, and this is what he says towards the end of the chapter on pages 36, 37, he says, but when these other agendas are at play, when people start turning it into an ego thing, and it's all about the advancement not of Islam, but the advancement of my organization or my tariqah or my sheikh, whatever it is, then he says the enemy then discovers this and takes advantage of it. This is what he says on page 36. The enemy discovers this, right? Because they look at like the enemies of Islam, they're looking for those weak points, right? They're looking for those weak points. Like, how can we infiltrate, right? This is that book we're working on for the future, al-Hub fil Quran by Imam al-Buti. Like, this is so key because he says He says, for example, that hub, like when you're involved in dawah work, it has to be based on love of Allah. It has to be based on love of Allah. It can't be based on love of rhetoric. It has to be based on love of Allah. But he said for two main reasons. Number one, if it's based on love of Allah, then what you say will actually affect other people. If it's based on the love of Allah, what you say will actually benefit other people. People will actually be affected by what you're saying. If it's just talk, if it's just rhetoric on the tongue, it doesn't get through to people. And number two, that that love of Allah is like a protective force field. It's a shelter. It will protect you. It's a fortress. It will protect you from the traps of people because there are enemies of Islam out there, and they look because they might see someone who's prominent, he's a famous scholar, he's a famous da'i, he's a famous speaker. They think, yeah, but we can see weakness. He likes fame, he likes money, he likes this. Okay, let's offer him this and that, right? So and Imam al-Buti gives the scary story in his durus. I don't think it's in his book, but it's in his durus. He mentions the story of a man called Ibn al-Saqqa. And this is a scary story about the importance of loving Allah and not letting inward sin and ego take over. So there's a story of there's three of them. There's it's Ibn al-Saqqa, Imam Abdul Jalani, rahimahullah, and Alhamdulillah anhu, and Ibn al-Surun, I think it is. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but Ustadh Jalali, I think it's Ibn al-Surun. I think that's his name. He's buried in Damascus. These three, they make an agreement that they're going to go visit a great Sheikh and Wali of Allah, Yusuf al-Hamadani. They're going to go visit him. They make this agreement to go visit him. And Ibn al-Saqqa, he had this kind of he had some arrogance. He said, "Well, I'm going to ask him a question because I don't think he's all that. I'm going to ask him a question. I'm going to try to stump him, right?" Ibn Asrun, I think that's what his name is. Ibn Asrun, he said, "Well, I'm just going to ask him um, for to make dua for me because I'm involved in tijara and I need to grow my business. So I was going to make dua for me." And Imam al-Jilani says, "I'm just going to go for the barakah, right? I'm just going to go for the barakah. That's it." And then when they meet Yusuf al-Hamadani, Imam Yusuf al-Hamadani, he meets all their needs. He answers Ibn Saqqa's question. And now I read a story online, a translation online from because the story is apparently it's in Imam al-Hajj al-Haytami's Fatawa Hadithiyah. So Imam Yusuf al-Hamadani, he says to Ibn Saqqa, he says, I see the fire of kufr inside you. Interesting thing. Now remember, Ibn Saqqa is at that time he was an amazing scholar, a brilliant scholar, like very, very well versed in fiqh, in hadith, in tafsir. He could destroy anyone in a debate, right? Very, very very, very eloquent. Um, and we'll go back to his story. And then Ibn Asrun, I think he made dua for him, and he was very successful. And he said to Imam Abdul Qadir Jilani, like you will be what you will be, basically, right? And we all know Allahu Akbar about what happened to Imam Abdul Qadir Jilani. But now the story of Ibn Saqqa is that after this meeting, the Byzantine emperor in Constantinople invites. He contacts he sends a letter to the Khalifa and he says, "I want you to send one of your best scholars to come to Constantinople and debate my scholars, right? My Christian theologians." Okay, so the Khalifa at that time he chooses Ibn al-Saqqa because that's what he's known for. He's known to be a brilliant debater, very, very eloquent, like I said before. Um, and he's just a master at debates. He can destroy anyone. So they bring him over, right? So Ibn Saqqa goes to what was Constantinople, and he goes into the debates, and he debates the Christian theologians, and he wipes the floor with them, right? He absolutely destroys them. He makes them look like students. But the emperor's onto something, right? The emperor's not stupid. He can sniff a weakness in this man, right? So what does he do? He tempts Ibn Saqqa with his daughter and and Ibn Saqqa sees her and becomes infatuated with her, and he's desperate to marry her, right? He wants to marry her right away. And the emperor says, "Well, that's nice, but my daughter's a Christian, you're a Muslim, that's not going to work now, is it? If you want to marry her, then you have to become a Christian." So what does he do? He becomes a Christian. When he becomes a Christian and he marries this woman.
You disconnected.
Christian cut my Wi-Fi. Oh, sorry. No, just that. Yeah, so the story is so Ibn al-Saqah, he becomes a Christian, but then not long after, I think he marries her, but then not long after that, he gets some sort of illness, and they kick him out of the palace, and he just becomes a homeless man on the streets of Constantinople, right? And the point is that again, it's all that knowledge, but then it's like, where's the love for Allah, right? Instead, there's this love of position, this love of reputation, this love of fame, and having his own shahawat and passions. And so the story ends where a Muslim goes to Constantinople and sees him, like a Muslim who knew him sees him on the streets. He's literally on the street, like homeless, like brushing flies away, and sees him. Goes, wait, are you Ibn al-Saqah? Is that you? And he's like, yeah, it's me. He's like, and he said, so what happened to you? And he said, he said, Allah made me forget all. I forgot all my knowledge. Everything I learned, memorized, I forgot. The only thing I remember, the only part of the Quran I remember is Surah Al-Hijr, Ayah 2. رُبَّمَا يُوَدُّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا كَانُوا مُسْلِمِينَ. Right? Maybe those who disbelieve will wish that they were Muslims. And then he started passing away. And the Muslim man says, I tried to turn towards the Kaaba, and instead he faced the east. I did that 3 times. And then he passed away in that state. Right? But the story that the wisdom of the story, and the other thing he said, Ibn Saqah, he says, I should have never been arrogant towards that wali of Allah, right? Uh, or I can paraphrase. That's what he said. I should have never been like that towards, meaning Imam Yusuf Hamadani. But the overall point here is when people get caught up in their own desires and uh, passions, and they don't root it in sincere love for Allah. And then the enemies of Islam take advantage of that. Because you can imagine what the emperor was doing. He's like, oh, look, this great Muslim scholar, he became a Christian. See, we convinced him. But it wasn't an intellectual conviction. And this again, the point, like I think I mentioned this before in previous halaqat, the point here is that again, when we think about love, because Allah says, من يرتد in Surah Al-Ma'idah 54, من يرتد منكم من دينه فسوف يأتي الله بقوم يحبهم يحبونه. Right? Whoever apostates from the religion, Allah will bring up from his religion, Allah will bring up people, he loves them and they love him. Right? It's all about hub. Allah doesn't say, I'll bring people who are smarter, I'll bring people who are intelligent. No, it's people who love, right? So again, people don't come into Islam just because they're intellectually convinced. No, they come to Islam because they love Allah. And likewise, people don't leave Islam because they become unconvinced. They leave Islam because of some other desire, because they love something else. But Ibn al-Saqah right there is an example. Um, so yes, so this is why the thing he finishes on this point is again regarding like we don't want like whether it's individuals or organizations or so forth, and we don't want the enemies of Islam to take advantage of us. One of the things he finishes on this point is that we also have to be careful with young people as well, because you can have young people. There are a lot of young people. This is the thing you finish on this chapter. There are young people who are passionate about Islam, have a lot of energy for Islam, a lot of zeal for Islam, and it's not right if they get taken advantage by this egoism, where people start using them for their own personal agendas or their own just to advance their organization, and not seeing that actually these youth and the energy and the desire and the enthusiasm they have can actually be put towards the greater goal of advancing Islam and spreading Islam and bringing people back to Allah, which is what we want. Alhamdulillah, so that's, well, I'll finish there and open the floor for questions and answers, inshallah.